Morning my uncle showed up with a locksmith. I was still in my pajamas drinking coffee. I hadn't even finished my first cup. It was 6:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. And I remember that detail exactly because I'd been up since 5 trying to finish a billing report for work. I'd set my mug down on the kitchen counter, walked to the window to check if it was going to rain, and that's when I saw them. My uncle's truck, my aunt's silver Camry, and a white van I didn't recognize parked halfway up the curb in front of my grandmother's house. My house. Let me be clear about that right now. I grew up in that house. 427 Clover Ridge Road, Akron, Ohio. 3 bedrooms, a screened-in porch that my grandmother called her thinking room, a backyard maple tree that my grandfather planted in 1974. My grandmother lived in that house for 51 years, and when she died in March, she left it to me. Not to the family, not to be split up. To me, Haley Monroe, her youngest granddaughter, who drove her to every single chemotherapy appointment for 14 months and slept on that pull-out sofa in the living room more nights than I can count, because she was scared to be alone after dark. She left me the house because I was there. Simple as that. I watched from the window as my uncle climbed out of his truck. He was wearing his church clothes, which struck me as strange for a Tuesday morning. My aunt got out of the Camry in a blazer like she was headed to a meeting. The man from the white van was already pulling a toolbox out of the back. I knew exactly what was happening. My stomach dropped, but not from surprise. I'd been waiting for this, honestly. The moment the attorney read the will out loud in that conference room 2 months earlier, I saw my uncle's face go completely still. Not sad. Still. The kind of still that means someone is already calculating. I set my coffee mug down very carefully on the counter and went to find my phone. My grandmother's name was Loretta Jean Monroe. She was 79 years old when she died and sharp until the very last month. She could still do the crossword puzzle in pen. She still called her friends every Sunday morning. She still had opinions about everything. My hair, my job, the way I loaded the dishwasher. She was not a woman who made decisions by accident. She and my grandfather bought that house in 1973, the year after they got married. He died in 2009, and she lived there alone ever since. She had 2 children, my father, who passed away from a heart attack when I was 19, and my uncle, her son, Kenneth, who lived 40 minutes away in Canton with his wife, my Aunt Dorothea. I need to paint you a picture of Kenneth and Dorothea, because you have to understand who showed up at my door that morning. Kenneth is 58 years old. He has never been unkind to my face. That's not how he operates. He's the kind of person who smiles while he's telling you something that should make you want to cry. He used to come around on holidays, call my grandmother on her birthday, show up at Easter with a ham from the grocery store deli. A solid C-plus effort at being a son. That was Kenneth. Dorothea is different. Dorothea is the kind of woman who keeps score of everything and never lets you forget it. When my grandmother's health started declining, Dorothea had a lot of opinions about care facilities. She forwarded my grandmother 3 different brochures for assisted living communities in the area. She told my grandmother at Thanksgiving that staying in a big house alone wasn't practical anymore. My grandmother showed me those brochures afterward. She'd written, "Absolutely not," across the top of each one in red pen. When the cancer diagnosis came, stage 3 ovarian, caught late, I was the one who cleared my schedule. I was working as a medical billing specialist at a hospital in Cleveland, 40 minutes away. I put in for a modified schedule, negotiated working from home 3 days a week, and moved a bag of clothes into that spare bedroom. I'm not saying that to make myself sound heroic. I'm saying it because it matters to what came later. Kenneth visited twice during those 14 months. Twice. Once at Christmas, once in the spring when my grandmother had a particularly bad week and the doctors wanted family present for a care discussion. He stayed 2 hours that second time and left before dinner. Dorothea did not visit at all. She sent a casserole in January. When my grandmother updated her will in October, 4 months before she died, she did it with full legal counsel, completely of sound mind and with a notary present. She left the house to me outright. She left her jewelry divided equally between me and my cousin Priya, Kenneth's daughter. She left her savings accounts, modest but real, split 3 ways between me, Priya, and my cousin on my father's side, A kid named Jonah who was in college in Colorado. She told me about it herself. She sat me down in that thinking room on a Saturday afternoon in November and told me exactly what she'd decided and why. She said, "This house needs to go to someone who will love it. I know you'll love it." Then she went back to her crossword and that was the end of the conversation. I never told anyone. I figured she would tell Kenneth herself, or that the attorney would handle it when the time came. The time came in March. My grandmother passed on a Wednesday morning quietly in her own bed, the way she wanted. I was there. I held her hand. I will not say more about that because it is still the hardest thing I have ever been through, and it is not the point of this story, but I want you to know it happened, and I want you to know that losing her wrecked me. Kenneth was at the house within an hour of me calling him. He was very calm, very practical. He made the phone calls that needed to be made. He organized the funeral arrangements. He was appropriate and measured, and I was grateful for it at the time. The will reading was 3 weeks later. I saw his face when the attorney got to the part about the house. "I already told you." Completely still. Dorothea grabbed his arm. Then she looked at me, and it wasn't grief in her eyes. It was arithmetic. They didn't say anything that day. They thanked the attorney. They drove home. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would accept it. My grandmother had made her wishes clear. The legal documents were airtight. What was there to argue? A lot, apparently. The calls started the week after, Kenneth calling to ask if we could talk about the house situation. Dorothea texting me long messages about family legacy and how my grandmother would have wanted things to stay in the family. As if I wasn't family. As if I had somehow stolen something. Then came the suggestion, delivered by Kenneth at a Sunday dinner I should not have attended, that maybe I should sell the house and split the proceeds 4 ways. Him, me, Priya, Jonah, equal shares. He framed it as being fair. He said my grandmother had probably not been fully thinking through the implications when she updated her will. I said no. He said he thought I was being selfish. I left dinner early. I drove home, to my house, and I sat in my grandmother's thinking room and I cried for a long time, not because he'd hurt my feelings, although he had, but because I realized this wasn't going to stop. These people were not going to let this go. I made an appointment with an attorney the next morning. Her name was Claudette Walsh, and she was the most no-nonsense person I have ever met in my life. She reviewed the will, reviewed the deed transfer documents that were already in process, and told me plainly the will was valid, the property was mine. And unless Kenneth wanted to pursue a formal legal challenge, which she assessed as having very low probability of success, there was nothing for me to be worried about. They can be upset, she told me. They don't have to like it, but they don't have legal standing. I felt better leaving that office. I felt better for about 3 weeks. Then Priya called me. Priya is 2 years older than me, and we've always been close in the way that cousins can be close. Not best friends, but people who genuinely like each other, who text on holidays, who would show up if the other one needed help. I trusted her. She called to warn me that her parents, Kenneth and Dorothea, had been talking about doing something about the house. She didn't know exactly what. She'd overheard a phone call her mother made, something about having someone come by. Priya sounded nervous. She said she didn't agree with them and wasn't involved, but she wanted me to know. I thanked her. I hung up. I called Claudette Walsh. Claudette told me to make sure I had copies of every document in a secure location outside the house, a safe deposit box, a cloud backup, a trusted person's home. She told me to change the locks if I hadn't already, since technically my uncle had a spare key from before my grandmother passed. I changed the locks the next day. I'm telling you this so you understand that what happened on that Tuesday morning was not a surprise. I had seen it coming. I had done what I could to prepare. But there's a difference between knowing something is going to happen and actually standing in your kitchen watching it happen through your window at 6:47 in the morning. I called Claudette's office before I even went to the door. I got her voicemail. Obviously, it was before 7 a.m., and I left a message describing exactly what I was seeing. 2 family vehicles, 1 unidentified van, a man with tools. Then I called 911. The dispatcher was calm, which helped me stay calm. I told her my name, my address, that I believed my uncle had arrived with a locksmith attempting to change the locks on my property without my permission. She told me to stay inside and that she was sending someone. Then my uncle knocked on the door. Not a frantic knock. A firm, deliberate knock. The kind that says, I know you're in there and we're going to do this whether you open the door or not. I stood in the hallway and I didn't move. Haley, his voice through the door. Haley, we need to talk. I didn't answer. We're not here to cause problems. We just want to have a conversation about the house. Your grandmother would have wanted the family to work this out together. My aunt's voice then, Haley, open the door, sweetheart, this is a family matter. I looked at my phone. 3 minutes since I'd called 911. Haley, I need you to understand something. Kenneth's voice again and some of the warmth had left it. The locksmith is here. We have paperwork. This doesn't have to be difficult. I finally spoke. I stayed where I was, in the hallway, not touching the door. I said clearly, I have called the police. I suggest you wait on the porch. Silence. Then, Dorothea, you called the police on your own family. I called the police because someone is attempting to change the locks on my property without my permission. That's trespassing and property interference. I suggest you wait. More silence. I heard them talking to each other low and quick. Voices I couldn't make out clearly through the door. 8 minutes after my 911 call, I heard the squad car. I opened the front door then. 2 officers walked up the front path, a woman named Officer Trent and her partner, Officer Diaz. Kenneth and Dorothea and the locksmith were standing on the porch. The locksmith already had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the ground like he wished he were anywhere else. The next hour was the most surreal of my entire life. Kenneth told the officers that the house was a family property and that there was a dispute over the will. He said he was there to protect the estate while legal matters were being resolved. He actually used those words, protect the estate, as if he were a trustee and not a man who had visited his dying mother twice in 14 months. I showed Officer Trent the deed transfer documents. I had them in a folder in the kitchen. Claudette had told me to keep hard copies accessible. My name, the property address, signed, notarized, filed with the Summit County Recorder's Office. I showed her the death certificate and the probate filing showing the will had cleared. She looked at the documents, looked at Kenneth, and said, Sir, the property transfer appears to be complete and legally valid. Is there an active legal challenge filed with the probate court? Kenneth said there would be. She said, until there is, this is her property. You cannot change the locks, you cannot enter without her permission, and I'd strongly advise you to take this matter to your attorney. Dorothea made a sound that I can only describe as a hiss. This is not over, she said. Not to the officers. To me. I didn't respond to that. I just watched them walk back to their vehicles. The locksmith apologized to me before he left. He genuinely seemed embarrassed. He said he'd been told it was a standard estate situation and he hadn't understood there was a dispute. I believe him. He packed up his van and left before my uncle's truck even pulled out of the driveway. I sat down on the porch steps after they were all gone. The officers had taken my contact information and told me to document everything. Photographs, timeline, any communication from Kenneth or Dorothea, and to call if anything else happened. Officer Trent gave me her card. She also very professionally mentioned that if Kenneth attempted anything similar again, there were grounds for a restraining order. I sat on those steps for a long time. The maple tree my grandfather planted was just starting to bud. It was early April, one of those cold, bright Ohio mornings when you can feel spring trying to happen. My grandmother used to sit on this porch every morning in spring. She'd have her coffee and she'd watch the birds at the feeder she kept next to the hydrangea bushes. I thought about her. I thought about how she'd known when she wrote that will that this might happen. She'd known her son. She'd updated that will anyway because she wanted to make sure I was protected even after she was gone. I decided right then that I was not going to let them take that from me. Claudette Walsh called me back at 8:15. I told her everything. She did not seem surprised. She said that Kenneth filing a will contest was possible but unlikely to succeed given the circumstances. My grandmother had been of sound mind. The will had been properly executed, and there was no evidence of undue influence. She said the attempt to change the locks actually helped me in a way, because it was documented misconduct that demonstrated bad faith. She filed a petition that week asking the probate court to formally confirm the estate settlement and deed transfer. She also sent a certified letter to Kenneth and Dorothea's home address stating that any further attempts to access or alter the property would be pursued as criminal trespassing. Kenneth filed a will contest 4 days later. His attorney argued, and I want you to hear this because I want you to understand the level of audacity involved, that my grandmother had been unduly influenced by me during her final months. That because I had been her primary caregiver, I had exerted pressure on her to change the will in my favor. That a woman who did the crossword in pen, who called her friends every Sunday, who told her son's wife to her face that she didn't agree with her opinions, had somehow been manipulated by her granddaughter into leaving her the house she lived in. The hearing was scheduled for late June, 11 weeks away. Those 11 weeks were the hardest I've dealt with since losing her. Not because I thought I was going to lose. Claudette remained confident, and the evidence was on my side. But because of what it meant that they were doing this at all. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, my stomach clenched. I started keeping a written log of everything, every call, every text, every time I drove past their cars on the street. Priya called me twice during that period, both times to apologize for her parents, both times sounding genuinely distressed. I believed her, but I also kept those conversations short. I didn't know who was telling them things. I changed my locks again just to be safe. I bought a video doorbell. I got a fireproof safe for the document copies. I also, during those 11 weeks, found out something that shifted everything. My grandmother kept a journal. I'd known about it vaguely. I'd seen her writing in it sometimes, a plain blue notebook at the kitchen table. But I hadn't thought about it after she died. When I was cleaning out her nightstand in May, I found a stack of them. 7 notebooks, going back 12 years. I sat down on the edge of her bed, and I started reading the most recent one. She wrote about her illness. She wrote about her doctors and the treatments and the side effects. She wrote about missing my grandfather, and about what she wanted her funeral to look like. She wrote about me, often, with warmth that made me have to stop reading and just sit with it for a while. She wrote about Kenneth too, about the assisted living brochures, about conversations she'd had with him where she'd felt pressured and dismissed, about her decision to update the will. She wrote, I know Kenneth will be angry. I know Dorothea will blame Haley. But I am doing what is right. Haley has been here. She has been here every single day, and that matters more than anything else I can think of. I photographed every relevant page. I sent the photos to Claudette. Claudette called me that afternoon and said in her flat, professional voice, well, this changes the nature of our preparation considerably. We submitted the journal entries as evidence. We also submitted the testimony of my grandmother's oncologist, who confirmed she had been mentally competent throughout her treatment period. We submitted records from the home health aide who came twice a week and had signed documentation of my grandmother's condition and capacity. We submitted the notary's affidavit from the will signing. Kenneth's attorney tried to argue the journals could have been fabricated. The handwriting analysis disagreed. The hearing lasted 4 hours. I sat at that table in the probate courtroom and I did not look at my uncle once. I looked at the judge. I listened to every word. I answered every question I was asked clearly and without elaborating unnecessarily, because Claudette had told me, answer what you're asked. Don't volunteer, don't get emotional. I did not get emotional in that courtroom. I had already done my crying at home. The judge ruled in my favor, completely, clearly, without qualification. She noted that the will had been properly executed, that the decedent had clearly been competent, and that the evidence of caregiver undue influence was not supported by the record. She also noted, in terms that were pointed enough that I felt them land in the room, that the conduct following the decedent's passing, including the attempt to alter the property locks, reflected poorly on the contesting party. Kenneth did not look at me when she read the ruling. Dorothea did. Her expression was flat and cold, and I met her eyes and I held them until she looked away. Outside the courthouse, my uncle tried to approach me. I don't know what he was going to say. Apologize, maybe. Or try one more time to negotiate. Claudette stepped in front of me and said pleasantly but very clearly that her client had nothing further to discuss with him and that any future communication should go through her office. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned and walked to his car. That was the last time I saw him in person. I blocked both his and Dorothea's numbers that night. I didn't send a message first. I didn't explain, I just blocked them. Priya is different. I still talk to Priya. She sent me flowers after the ruling with a card that said, "I'm sorry this happened." She loved you. I kept that card. I moved into the house the following weekend. I'd been staying in my apartment in Cleveland while all of this was going on, partly because it felt wrong to be there while the legal challenge was active, and partly because I wasn't ready. After the ruling, I was ready. Moving in was strange and sad and exactly right, all at the same time. I put my things in the spare bedroom first, the room I'd slept in during all those months of chemo drives and late nights. Then slowly I started putting things in the rest of the house. My books on the shelves, my coffee maker on the kitchen counter, a plant I'd had in my apartment for 3 years on the windowsill in the thinking room. I kept my grandmother's furniture mostly where it was. I kept her bird feeder next to the hydrangea bushes. The first morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee. I watched a cardinal land on that feeder. My grandmother used to say that cardinals were visits from people who had passed. I don't know if I believe that, but I sat there a long time watching it and I thought, she knew what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote that will, and she did it anyway, and I was here, and that is why this house is mine. If you're reading this and you're going through something similar, family members who think grief is a negotiation, who treat a loved one's final wishes as an opening offer, I want you to hear this. Get your documents in order before anything happens if you can. Get an attorney who isn't afraid to be direct. Keep records of everything. Screenshot the texts. Write down the dates and times of every incident. Do not let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what is legally and rightfully yours. And change your locks. Not because it fixes everything, but because sometimes a locked door is the clearest possible statement that you already know what you deserve and you're not letting anyone take it. I still have coffee on the porch most mornings now. It's October, so I've moved inside mostly, but on warm days I still go out there. The maple tree is red and gold right now. The way it gets every fall. The way it's been getting every fall since 1974. I look at it and I think about my grandfather planting it as a young man, and my grandmother watching it grow for 50 years, and now me, watching it too. The house is mine. She made sure of it, I made sure of it, that's the whole story. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did, not in the bitter way. I'm past bitter. But in the way you turn something over in your hands after it's finally over, trying to understand the shape of it. My uncle made choices, a long string of them, starting years before my grandmother got sick. He chose to send brochures instead of showing up. He chose to stay 2 hours when she needed people to stay longer. He chose, after she died, to treat her final wishes like a problem to be negotiated rather than a person to be honored. And every one of those choices had a cost. Not one that I assigned to him, but one that accumulated on its own, quietly, the way things do when you're not paying attention. I made choices too. I cleared my schedule. I drove the 40 minutes. I slept on that pull-out sofa because she didn't want to be alone in the dark. I'm not going to pretend those choices were easy or that I never resented them. There were nights I was exhausted in a way I couldn't even name, but I made them because she was worth making them for. And as it turned out, they were also the choices that protected me when I needed protection the most. Not because I planned it that way. Because that's simply what happens when you do the right thing consistently over time. The record speaks for itself. What I didn't expect was the journals. I didn't go looking for them with any strategy in mind. I found them in her nightstand while I was cleaning out her room. And when I started reading, I wasn't thinking about court hearings or legal evidence. I was just missing her. But she had written everything down, what she felt, what she decided, why she decided it, in her own handwriting, in her own words, in those plain blue notebooks she kept on her nightstand for years. She had told the truth, in private, with no audience, simply because that's who she was. And that truth, preserved in those pages, was exactly what was needed when someone tried to rewrite her story after she was gone. That's the part I keep coming back to. She didn't protect me on purpose in those journals. She just lived honestly. She just wrote what was true. And it turned out that living honestly, really living it, not performing it, leaves a trail that stands up when it matters. I think about Priya too. She called me when she didn't have to. She warned me when she could have stayed quiet and kept the peace in her own house. That took something. It didn't fix what her parents did, but it reminded me that choosing integrity inside a family that isn't acting with integrity is one of the harder things a person can do. I don't take that lightly. What I want to say, if any of this resonates with you, is this. The people who show up are rarely the people who talk about showing up. The person who is actually there, driving, waiting, sitting in hospital hallways, answering the phone at 2 a.m., that person is usually too tired to announce themselves. They're just doing it. And the record of that over time is unambiguous. You don't need to be loud about what's right. You just need to keep doing it. Document what matters. Protect what's yours through legal channels, not confrontation. Know the difference between people who are part of your life and people who are performing a role in it. And when someone shows you, clearly and repeatedly, that they are willing to override someone's dying wishes for their own benefit, believe them the first time they show you. Don't wait for the locksmith van. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she wrote that will. She'd spent 79 years figuring out who people were. She trusted her own judgment. So do I.